other than that, just open up for questions if you've got anything to say. Any questions, that is.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Right, who's got the first question for Steve? Yeah, Ken. You need to unmute, Ken.
Unmuted. It's 2 points, actually. Well, first, I just want to say that were a great video, great in the presentation and what it was all about. And what I did like about it is how he kept summarising what you were describing, and I thought that was a very good point. My question, though, is why is it, and it has been said to me many times, and I can only think it's because you're nearer to the equator, that when you are working from a place like the north of Africa or the south of Spain, and I read up once that Seville in the south of Spain is probably the best place in the northern hemisphere to be for overall better DX working. Is it something to do with the magnetic field?
I think it's probably got more to do with the total electron content in the ionosphere, to be honest. The equatorial regions obviously get the sun is more overhead, so there tends to be more electrons in the ionosphere at that point. Whereas if you get to the extreme North Pole, South Pole, the sun angle is that much lower, so the electron content is less. I think I was looking at some electron distribution graphs earlier today, and I think it showed a very strong electron content over the equator. So I think that's what it is. I think geomagnetically there's probably something in that too. Obviously when we have disturbances, the particles off the sun get funneled towards the poles, North Pole and South Pole, and basically don't really affect the ionosphere in the center too much. We have a magnetic equator as well. So it's a combination, I think, of quite high total electron count over the equator and less absorption over the equator. That's not to say, however, that propagation in the equatorial regions is fantastic. I think if anyone's ever worked there, they'll know that D-layer absorption kicks up quite quickly. So some of the lower bands can go completely dead during the day, just leaving the higher bands to be open. But it's something that is worth looking at with an HF propagation program like VOACAP or ITUR HF Prop, or better known as PRED test, on the RSGB website to see. Do you travel much? Is this somewhere where you're thinking of going?
No, but I do a lot of work from down in Spain. And
all right.
What I notice is that it's a lot easier to work DX from down there. I mean, we talk about DX. I like working DX, but at the same time, I like working local, European working. But I find that it's a lot easier to work DX from sort of the nearer to the equator that you go.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think trans-equatorially as well, you get a condition called TEP, trans-equatorial propagation as well, which misses us completely up here. You often hear, just looking at my map now, of people making contacts from Spain down into South Africa and Southern African states. We can't hear a thing. So there is a lot to that.
Thanks.
I'd go for total electron content as the main reason, I think.
Okay, Steve, thanks very much for that.
Okay.
Thank you, Ken. Right, and who's got a question? Yeah, David.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for making that available free on YouTube. You normally have to pay for that sort of stuff. My main area of interest is, I'm looking down at my question because I worded it while we were doing the talk. My main area of interest is HF contesting and DXing.
Right.
Make a plan for a contest to show where to work, when to change bands and what direction. Would I just have to create multiple charts with VOACAP or something like that? Or is there something else? And the second part is the prediction charts in RADCOM must be submitted quite a way in advance. So how far in advance could I do that if I was preparing for an event that was coming up?
Okay, let's have a look. Content. I just want to get something up on my screen. We do this in Norfolk every year with HF Field Day. And basically, we used to come up with a list of potential areas that you might want to work, but I just found that was quite tedious. So I would have a chart for every hour or every other hour. So you might have one for midday, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock, based on our location, and that seemed to work quite well. Then obviously you need a chart for every band, but that isn't as bad as it sounds, because you're knocking out the WARC bands. So you look at 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10. So that's only 80, 40, that's 5, isn't it? It's not so bad. So we ended up with a book. We bound a book. Now, that can be produced quite readily in advance, because most propagation prediction programs, if not all propagation prediction programs, use a monthly medium smooth sunspot number, which is pretty predictable. You can kind of guess what the smooth sunspot number will be, or you have charts that tell you what the smooth sunspot number will be for that particular month. So you can prepare those things months in advance. So yeah, we would have a bound book, and on each page would be 5 charts for each of the bands for that particular time. So you could see what you are likely to be able to work. Now, that obviously didn't counter or come into, what am I trying to say? It didn't account for long path predictions as well. So you might need another chart or set of charts for long path predictions. But of course, I mean, at the moment, with the way the sunspot cycle is, I wouldn't even bother with long path predictions, to be honest. I think it also depends on your contest site. If you're using Yagis at height, then yes, I would have those charts. And yes, I would make sure that the charts reflected the amount of gain we had at the campsite, or at the field day site. And then yes, you could include the long path ones as well. So getting back to your question about Radcom, they are produced probably about 3 months in advance, but they're all based on smooth sunspot numbers. So the smooth sunspot number for this month, I think, is 1 or 0, and so I mean, it's been like that for the last few months. So there really is much of a difference between a prediction with sunspot number of 1 or even 5 or 10 makes little difference at all. But yeah, that's the way we did it. And I used VoaCap online to produce those charts. I mean, there are a number of ways of doing it. Years ago, you always used to have to run a PC program to produce these things, but now everything's online. It makes it a lot easier. So you can use PredTest to come up with the charts that you want, or you could use VoaCap, either one, and then just basically paste them into a big book. And that's how we did it. That's how we do it.
Okay, thanks. So it is lots of work beforehand, making up lots of charts and putting it into a book. And
yeah, somebody lost the book.
Yeah.
Somebody lost the book. Yeah, I know. You couldn't make it up, could you?
Spines.
Yeah. The other way of doing it is just have a PC, a laptop running at the show site with one of these things up there, and so it's showing in real time the predictions, and just say, just click through the bands to see which band looks good. But I think the other thing about producing predictions for field day and other events is that you can add information in, like you can add, watch out for grey line openings at this particular time, or watch out for sporadic E openings. I mean, for instance, if we were about to do field day, which obviously with COVID-19 we're not doing it, but I mean, I would have a book, and then I would say, watch out sort of 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, maybe through to 2 o'clock. Do look out for sporadic E openings on 10 meters, which would, probably give you some good multipliers. But that's the way to do it. The other alternative is to use the charts that we have put on the internet, which is the VOACAP or the RADCOM charts, which are based on VOACAP. So you can then put your gain in of the antenna you're using in the bands, and it comes up with charts of just color charts of each hour. So it's a bit simpler. You don't have to have a whole chart of the world. So it really depends how efficient your operators are and what they want to look at. What we normally find is somebody get on a band and they just don't move from it. That's the trouble. But if you've got a beam as well, I think that makes a big difference to know what's open and where, which way to point the beam.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, David. Right, who else has got a question? Do you want to wave at me if you want to speak? Yeah, Russell, G4ZRZ.
Just a quick question, Steve. Any predictions for solar cycle 25? Is it going to be a good one?
The predictions basically were revised about a month or so ago, I think. The prediction is that it'll be pretty much the same as solar cycle 24. We are at sunspot minimum. We can expect the solar cycle to pick up again pretty much anytime soon, but probably before October, we should start to see it picking up a little bit better.
Okay.
As for the overall conditions, likely to be similar. Maximum sunspot number just over 100, I think 110. So very similar to 24, which was not a particularly exciting sunspot cycle, I don't think. But I mean, we've kind of lived with virtually zero sunspot numbers for the last year or 18 months now. That's going to continue at least till the autumn. I think the sunspot minimum was meant to be, I think it was described as April 2020 plus or minus 6 months. So obviously we've gone past the April period now, and there are signs that the sun is starting to come to life. There's been a couple of plage areas on the sun, which are lighter areas on the sun, but there's no sunspot has actually, been driven by it. And we have seen a couple of sunspots from sunspot cycle 25. We know they are by their magnetic configuration and also their latitude. If they're at a higher latitude from the new cycle, they appear higher on the sun's surface. And so we are getting there, but it should start to kick off within the next few months, I think.
That'll be good. Thank you.
Yeah, it will.
Okay, thank you, Russell. Right, anyone else got a question to David? Just to scroll through everybody. If you don't catch my eye, doesn't matter, just unmute yourself and put the question. Anyone else with a question to Steve?
Yeah, I can have a quick one, Nick, if I may.
Yes, go on, Gerald.
Hi, Steve.
Hi.
Very interested in all that. It was good. Following on from the last comment, one of the ones on YouTube was predicting that it's seen the first sunspots of the new cycle.
Yes. Where have you gone? You faded away.
He gets his internet over a telephone line. That's the problem, Steve.
Right. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, try again.
Propagation's gone, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, typical. Have another go with your question. Okay, well, let me, I mean, I think the question was probably about the sunspots, new sunspots in cycle 25. And yes, there have been a few, I think 2 or 3, but they've been very, very minor, very small and pretty nondescript. And some of them have actually disappeared before they've really rotated much into Earth's view. There was one a couple of weeks ago, but it was tiny. It was a speck. Hardly, it looked more like a piece of dust actually than anything. And by the time it had rotated to be Earth-facing, it had gone. But they are coming. They are there. The predictions, as I said, are that the cycle should kick off any minute now. And the good news is that on the whole, sunspot cycles, when they kick off, they rise quite quickly. What we are noticing is fewer coronal holes on the sun, which is they're a feature of the downward side of the cycle. So the fact that they are now beginning to die out a bit, and we're starting to see these plage areas, suggests that the sunspot cycle is about to kick off. And let's hope that answered your question. Whatever the question was, I don't know.
Yeah, that was it. Spot on.
Oh, right.
Thank you very much.
Good.
My wife's on Zoom downstairs on the other computer, and I think it takes the bandwidth, what little we've got here. And it just...
Yeah, there he goes, yes.
There we go, yeah. Okay, thanks, Gerald. You can have a word with Denise later. Right, anyone else got a question for Steve? Yes, Tom from South Africa.
Yeah. Hi, Steve. First of all, very interesting talk, and you did touch on long paths slightly. I work a lot of long path, and that was wide open to the States and today, as usual, and I almost worked 40 meters long path in my early afternoon. Is it much the same frequency that's MUF and that for long path as well as the short path?
Well, the timing is totally different. That's the interesting thing. When you do a prediction with VOACAP or ITU or HF Prop, you have to say whether you want long path or short path, because you may find that the long path is open at a totally different time. For example, I think Australia from the UK, long path to Australia is, I've got to get this right now, I think it's generally about 8 o'clock, and then short path is about 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm not too sure if those times are right, but so in terms of the frequencies, long path generally is a little bit weaker than a short path because it's generally a lot further to go, but the timing is totally different, and that's why you need to check it with a propagation prediction program.
Okay, thanks very much, Steve. Yeah, I must disagree that quite often the long path is a lot stronger than the short path, and at the same time, if its long path is strong, I'll often get short path as well. So it's an interesting thing, but I appreciate what you're saying. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. I think from South Africa, where are you working long path? I'd be interested to know.
I work long path like today was 1200 Zulu into the States, and worked quite a half a dozen stations there. And then usually the long path on 40, it comes about 1300 Zulu, no, sorry, cancel that, 1400 Zulu long path stateside. Well, the Japanese are not in there yet. They're short path at the moment, but they get to be about that's over 900 Zulu in my summertime. You know,
yeah.
I know about the changeover because it's slightly different there because of this difference between the hemispheres, of course.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Do you have a beam? I bet you do.
Yeah, I've got a 3-element tri-band, sorry, 4-element tri-bander, and a 3-element walk band antenna, and 3 elements on that, and 2 elements shorty 40 on 40 meters. But I find that if 40 meters is in, you can work them on the rotary dipole anyway. Yeah,
yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I think short path, long path, it favors people with beams, I think. But you're absolutely right. I think Australia and New Zealand from the UK, long path is generally better than the short path. I mean, with New Zealand, short path and long path are pretty much the same. It's an Antipodean path, really. But yeah, I think also it helps to have a little bit of solar flux, to be honest. I think conditions have been so dire recently that that's why long path hasn't always been quite so active, which is why I said, are you running a beam and some power? That helps a lot, I think.
Yeah, well, we're allowed a kilowatt, so that does help, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. Good. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Steve. Right, anyone else with a question to Steve? Wave at me, unmute yourself. Yeah, Richard, RBG.
Yeah, good evening, Steve. First of all, thanks very much indeed for a fascinating talk. Just out of interest, what does your station comprise of?
My station? Okay, well, I'm basically HF focused, really, not VHF and UHF, I think. VHF, UHF is basically just Slim Jim, to be honest. I don't really do much. Other than that, it's not particularly good. I have a off-center fed dipole and a W5GI dipole and set of dipoles for what have we got, 40, 20, 17 and 10. So they're all kind of spread out, but there's no gain antennas here at all. I have to make do with visiting friends or waiting until we have contests. But it's basically dipoles.
Right. What's your favourite mode?
CW.
Yeah.
I think that seems to cut. CW. I'm a massive fan of CW because it cuts through when everything else, you know, it falls by the wayside. I'm not a fantastic CW operator, don't get me wrong, but I do enjoy CW, and I've worked more DX on CW than sideband. I mean, I was licensed since 1981, but didn't really do an awful lot of DXing until probably 1995 when we started doing more contesting and getting into DXing, and I was suddenly astonished just what you could work. You know, never really thought about it. So yeah, I used to chase all the DXpeditions and worked T32C and the rest. But yeah, it's CW really.
Yeah, I'm going to say I've been using using some of the VE Day GB calls this last few weeks, and without CW, I'm really scratching about to make contact. Yeah. CW has been really good, and I think it's even beaten FT8, you know, according to the RSGB figures.
Well, FT8, yeah, got to watch what I say, haven't I? I've got mixed feelings about FT8. I was very anti FT8 when it first came out, but it is astonishing what you can do with FT8. I mean, we've been noticing, let's go and have a look now. I've had it on running here all day just listening, and we've had some of the Caribbean coming in on 10 meters via multi-hop sporadic E, and you can't even hear the damn stuff. But as a mode, I don't find it very fulfilling, really. It's not the same, I don't think. But the trouble is, people have got more interested in FT8, and they've kind of gone away from CW and SSB. And so you can go on 10 meters now, and there we are. I've got signals on FT8, but I bet if I go down the CW end, there won't be anyone.
No, I know it's a difficult one, isn't it?
Yeah.
But, yeah, surprisingly, this morning, 20 meters, about 7:45, was open to KL7, which was a very, very pleasant surprise. I didn't work him because of our friends with the country that looks like a shoe. It was difficult to work.
Yeah. Yeah. But having said that, I mean, FT8, if you haven't got a very good station or you've got restricted antennas, you will get some cracking distances. I think the other thing is, I think some people run an awful lot of power on FT8. We have somebody locally who's running a kilowatt on FT8. That doesn't really make it a weak signal mode, but there we go. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Steve.
Okay.
What's your radio, by the way?
I've got two. I've got an ICOM 756 Pro 3, and I've got a Yaesu FTDX 3000. Well, I've got a Yaesu 991A, but I bought the FTDX 3000 because I've always had this thing about I'd like a PAN adapter, but I don't want to go SDR. I didn't want to flex. I just hate anything that has to work with Windows PCs, to be honest. So I bought the FTDX 3000, and I have a PAN adapter running off that. And I just bought it really to see how I got on with it, and I haven't touched the 756 Pro 3 in about 6 months because of that. But I don't want to sell it because it's just too good, really.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed.
Okay.
Thank you, Richard. Right, any more questions for Steve? Yes, Terry.
Yes, hello everybody. Hello, Steve, and thanks for the sharing of your knowledge and expertise. I have a couple of whisper lights, and I have put both of them onto 40 meters, both of them, each one into a separate vertical, separated by about 40 feet, a vertical which is held up by a tree in each case, plus a single radial along the fence. Running them simultaneously, such that they both transmit at the same time, within a few cycles of each other. I find that the results reported vary quite a lot. They don't go up and down together. They can go out of phase. And when it's offered as a tool for evaluating aerials, I find that I can't evaluate either of mine. Sometimes one is better than the other. 5 minutes later, the other one's better. Your thoughts, please. Similar aerials, identical times of day, and the paths are quite different. And the signal reports, the signal strengths reported, are also different.
Do you find one antenna is consistently better than the other?
No.
No. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
They are both, but not simultaneously better than the other. But it's a fair wide deviation between the reported signal strengths.
Yeah, I think Whisper as a means of testing antennas is a little bit flawed, if you like, in a way. And I'll tell you why, because basically it's a snapshot in time. And as that snapshot is taken and you have a figure for a signal to noise ratio, and then literally 10 seconds later, you might have a totally different signal to noise ratio. And then 10 seconds later, you may have that. So from that respect, that's why I'm not a massive fan of using Whisper to test antennas, unless you can get 100 readings and then average them out. That's the way I normally do it. Why you should get totally different readings from two antennas that are 40 feet apart, that's a little bit more of a question, isn't it?
A total puzzlement, and I don't bother anymore.
No, I think you're right. All right. I mean, it depends what's around them as well. I think that the trouble is, antenna modeling programs and theories suggest that you have an antenna and it's in a completely open field with nothing anywhere near it. But generally, life is not that simple, and I think you get reflections off buildings and absorption off buildings and trees, and that can mess things around as well. But yeah, it's interesting that you've got two virtually identical ones, but you're getting different results. The fact they're both polarized the same way, if you'd said one was horizontal, one was vertical, and you were getting different results, that I could explain that one away, because I heard someone on the repeater the other day saying that they were going to work DX, but he said, oh, he was using horizontal, therefore I need to use horizontal. I said, well, no, if it goes via the ionosphere, it gets scrambled. Totally scrambled. What comes back is a circular polarized wave with left or right hand circular polarization and different phasing of the elements. So I think that's the interesting thing about polarization, is that if it goes via the ionosphere, it is not going to retain its polarization at all. But your two are pretty much the same. So yeah, that's an interesting one. Something could be detuning the aerial. They could be interacting between the two. 40 feet is not a big distance for 40 meters, is it? So I think that, are they interacting with each other as well, I wonder?
Well, if they do, why does it do it not cyclically, but variably?
Yeah, okay. I think if you knew the answer, yeah, if you knew the answer, you'd be telling me, wouldn't you? It's one of those things that you think, well, that's odd. Yeah.
Yes, it is plainly odd, and that's the end of it, really.
Yeah, yeah. But I said, with Whisper, I've got Chris Deacon, G0KYA, has been doing some work on signals that going via the ionosphere using diversity reception, so listening to one on a horizontal antenna and one on a vertical antenna. And he says that the propagation is such that, admittedly this is on 6 meters, so it's not totally true, it's sporadic E, but the polarization can change, over a period of a second or so, and you can't ever predict what polarization you're going to get coming back. So, and then the ionosphere is the same, I suppose. So, maybe it's just a slight fluctuation in the ionosphere between the two.
Maybe there's the reason why you want one of these SDR plays with two LUX receivers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Interesting question. Right, any other people got a question with Steve before we call it a night? Have I missed anyone?
Hello.
Yeah, Richard. Go on, Richard.
Hiya. How would you find your GI antenna regarding all the multiple bands it works on?
I find it works really well on 80, really well on 40. It's okay on 20, and beyond that, I don't use it. I think, like a lot of antennas, G5RV, the same, is that they're better on the lower bands, but once you start climbing up in frequency, the performance isn't quite as good as you'd like. I mean, the W5GI was allegedly designed for 20 meters, but I don't find it a brilliant 20-meter antenna. It's not an awful 20-meter antenna, but it's not brilliant. But on 80, I've kept it up because it performs very well on 80 for me, anyway.
How high do you have it?
About 30 feet.
Yeah. Because it's one of those antennas that nobody can model, isn't it?
Yeah, allegedly, yeah. The thing about the W5GI is, I think when it was designed, he said it operated by phasing the elements, but it doesn't really. I do wonder sometimes whether it's any better or worse than a G5RV. We did do some tests with somebody, and he said he found it outperformed the G5RV, but I wouldn't put my money on that one. But I've used Wyndham's here, an 80-meter Wyndham, 132-foot Wyndham, and it's okay. But I got losses in the balun that I'd made, where there is no balun in this. But I think in the end, I put the thing up for the 80-meter club championship, and I'm quite happy with the results I get, so I've stuck with it. I'm not the strongest signal by any means, but it kind of works, so I've left it. One thing I would say about the W5GI is they do have a nasty habit of breaking, because you've got so many solder joints in there, well, 2 solder joints on either side, that invariably, eventually, one of them gives, I think. But it works. I'm not sure it works the way that W5GI said it worked, but I like it. It's okay. It does the job.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Right, anyone got a question to Steve? Can't see anyone with a hand up. If everyone's finished on the questions, I would like to thank Steve very much for joining us tonight for the questions and answers. It was thoroughly enjoyable, and my apologies to everyone for the poor quality of the YouTube video, and I hadn't spotted when I set it running that I was sharing the whole screen and not just the browser. So lesson learned to pay more attention, Bradley, when you're setting these things up. So thank you everyone for bearing with me. Gerald, do you just want to say good evening to everyone before we disappear, and to say Gerald is, for those that don't know him, coming tonight, Gerald is the club president of Denby Dale Radio Society Club. So Gerald, over to you. Oh, no, we're not going to get Gerald. Denise is back on the iPad by the looks of it.
Is it breaking up again?
It is, yeah. Go on, fire away, Gerald.
Yeah, I'm just saying thank you anyway, Nick. You can say it for me if you like. She hadn't finished her meeting down.
Well, we've lost Gerald. I will say to Steve, on behalf of the club, thank you very much for coming tonight, and thank you to everyone that's turned up. And I'm sure lots of us are going to be disappearing off, looking at some of these antenna modelling. Steve, I'm a great fan of the reverse beacon network.
Yeah,
I'm a CW op, and I find it absolutely fascinating. And of course, you can download the data from it as well, both to compare antennas in real time. But it's fascinating to see the way in which we get amazing shifts of propagation so quickly sometimes that you suddenly realise just within 10-15 minutes that signals have really changed dramatically on HF. I don't. I haven't talked to other people about it at the club really, but are you a fan of the reverse beacon network too?
I am a fan of the reverse beacon network, and I've been using it the last 3 days because the G0KYA produced a 10-meter beacon list, but it's not really been touched over the last few years, and he's handed it over to us to look after, the Propagation Studies Committee, that is, look after. So I've been updating it, and I eventually decided that the reverse beacon network was the best system to use, because it would spot all the 10-meter beacons, and I could check them against the list and add them if they're not there. And we found a lot of changes that needed to be made to it. But the great thing about it is because the reverse beacon network works globally. So I've been spotting California beacons that have been spotted in the States. So a fantastic tool for updating that list. And I updated it about a week ago, and I've got about another 30 changes to put in it. So yeah, big fan of reverse beacon network. The other thing you find is that with antennas, that sometimes you have a lobe in one direction that works really well with one antenna, and you switch the other one and it disappears. But then you'll find another lobe where it does work well. So you have to. It's very hard to say, oh, this antenna is better than that antenna. To be categorical about it, you can say, well, in this direction it's better, but for that direction you need another antenna. So yeah, all good fun.
Okay, well, look, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Steve, for giving up your time and joining us tonight. I'm sure what I'll do tomorrow, everybody, is share the recording from the questions and answers, and I'll put up the link to the YouTube video that Steve's put it on YouTube that we show this evening. So with that, I will actually close the meeting tonight. We will, as normal in Denby Dale,